This is a season our ancestors feared the most, when autumn decayed into winter, when lightness made way for darkness and the night drew in. The Celts took its power seriously. As their Druid priests made sacrifices around blazing bonfires, they too would take no risks in keeping the spirits at bay. This was the true spirit of Halloween, or Samhain as they knew it, a time when the boundaries between the other worlds were seemed to blur, the true season of the dead. This, my spooky friends, is the season of the dead, a journey through Britain's darkest places, as All Hallows Eve draws near, and the veil between the living and the dead trembles. Hello friends, and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, I'm Claire. This is The Wanderlust Way. Firstly, let me say a huge thank you to everybody that supports this channel by liking, commenting, subscribing, sharing, becoming members, sending super thanks, and obviously the recent hype button. I know a lot of you have been pressing that, so thank you so much. All your support allows me to carry on with adventures like this and share the stories that I find with you. Okay, so today we are really close to Halloween now, and we are episode 4 of our season of the dead. And we're here to learn about the dark rituals and meanings behind Halloween and the Celtic festival of Samhain. So last week we learned all about the corpse paths and some of the death omens and the rituals that our ancestors would take to ensure their loved ones met their journey to the other world with care, with love, and obviously with protection. This week we're going to look at the darker side. We're going to look at what happens once they finally get to the other world and how we then use protections and rituals to make sure they stay there. But of course, one night of the year things happen and things are slightly different, and that is of course Halloween. So that's what this episode is going to be about. We are filming it here in the Druids temple in Yorkshire, which isn't actually a temple, but we will go more into that shortly. So if you're ready for another spooky adventure, please stay tuned, pull up a chair, and maybe grab yourself a pillow to hide behind, because that is enough waffle. Let's wander. To truly understand Halloween, we need to step back 2,000 years into the world of the Celts. The Celts were not a single tribe, but a vast collection of peoples whose culture spread across much of Europe, from what is now Ireland and Britain to Gaul, parts of Spain, and even as far as Anatolia. Celtic communities spoke related languages, shared customs, and lived by a calendar shaped not by ink on parchment, but by the land itself. Here in the United Kingdom, a lot of people of the time would have lived in scattered settlements. They would have cared for the land, they would have tended their animals, and they would have followed the cycles of nature with an intense watch, something a lot of us now have long since forgotten. The Celtic year was divided into two halves, the light half and the dark half. The light half brought spring and summer, planting, growth, abundance. But the dark half brought autumn and winter, the season of decay, scarcity and death. Samhain marked that turning point. It was the Celtic New Year, beginning on the 1st of November. The harvest was done, the last of the crops gathered, surplus livestock slaughtered and preserved to feed the people through the lean months. At the same time, sheep were mated to provide next year's stock. Every detail of their survival was bound to this season. The Celts truly believed that this time of year was a very powerful time, that the veil between the worlds was thinner, and therefore not only could their loved ones return in spirit, but also malevolent forces of evil. So they did everything they could to prevent this from happening. Their gods reflected this duality, their union at Samhain ensuring the balance of the seasons. Gods of harvest and fertility gave way to darker deities of death and prophecy. This was the time when the gods themselves seemed closer, their power looming over every fire and field. Presiding over these rituals were the Druids, the priests, scholars and spiritual leaders of Celtic society. They kept the calendar, read omens and oversaw the great fires lit on the hills. The people looked to them for guidance, protection and sacrifice. We'll return to them later, but for now it's enough to remember that in the Celtic imagination, nothing about Samhain was trivial. The signs of the season reinforced the belief. The decay of autumn leaves, the fields laying bare, the summer blooms withering into skeleton leaves. The darkness swallowed more of the day with each passing sunset, and to the Celts this only confirmed the belief that the natural and the supernatural were inseparable. Samhain was a threshold, a night of endings and beginnings, of fear and hope, of survival and remembrance. It was the true new year, the hinge upon which the living world and the world of spirits both turned. For the ordinary folk, survival meant cunning. People pulled on masks and cloaks, disguising themselves as spirits so that wandering ghosts would pass them by. In some places they went door to door demanding food or coins, not for themselves, but to offer up to the gods and the dead. The earliest trick-or-treaters were not children in costumes, but frightened villagers trying to buy their way through the night. Protections were everywhere. Lanterns carved from turnips glowed with twisted faces, guarding homes against anything that slipped through the veil. Blood was smeared across doors, a gruesome ward to keep spirits from crossing the threshold. In Ireland, plates of food were even left out for the fairies, not gentle sprites, but powerful beings who could bless or curse a household, best to keep them satisfied. And then there were the feasts, where tables of food would be laid out, and they would always leave one place setting empty for their loved ones that had already departed. Now the plates would be filled up, but they of course would not be touched. They would be left solely for the spirits. Imagine the silence of this kind of supper, eaten in honour of the dead, the only sound the scrape of cutlery while unseen guests sat among you. But Samhain wasn't only about honouring the dead, it was about glimpsing the future. Apples floated in bowls of water, their seeds used to predict who you would marry. Nuts were cast into the fire, their crackle said to reveal loyalty or betrayal. Even mirrors and candlelight were turned into tools to glimpse the face of the one you'd love, or, sometimes, the shadow of death itself. Soul cakes were also baked, small spiced offerings given out in exchange for prayers for the dead. Some say this custom passed down through the centuries. It may have planted the seed of the trick-or-treat tradition we know today. These were not harmless games. Every mask, every smear of blood, every plate of food and flickering lantern was part of a bargain. A pact struck in firelight at the very edge of winter, when the dead walked close enough to taste the living's fear. To truly understand Samhain, I'm told we must turn to those who stood at its centre, the Druids, white-robed figures cloaked in secrecy, keepers of law and guardians of sacred groves. They were more than priests. They were judges, teachers, philosophers, a class apart, said Julius Caesar, so feared and revered that young men would spend 20 years at their feet learning the mysteries of gods and nature. The Druids believed that everything in nature held spirit, gnarled trees, calm pools, even stones shaped by time. Everything they believed held the divine. The oak especially was sacred, roots digging deep into the underworld, branches stretching skyward like a living altar. Even today, when we touch wood for luck, it is an echo of those ancient gestures, a plea to the spirits thought to dwell within. On the 6th night of the moon, Druids cut mistletoe with golden sickles, its pale berries gleaming in the torchlight. The branches were divided among the people, hung above doorways to protect against lightning, misfortune and evil itself. These charms remind us that Samhain was not only about endings, it was also about survival, about holding fear at bay as winter closed in. Not all was light. The Romans told some pretty dark tales about human sacrifice, animal sacrifice. They said that the Celts and the Druids, they would put humans inside giant wicker men, and they'd put them next to the bonfires and they would burn them as sacrifice to the gods and to the spirits. Not everybody believes that. There's not a tremendous amount of historical proof. There is a little bit, but the theory is that obviously the Romans came to invade and they were taking over, so there was a little bit of rivalry there, so it could have been propaganda. What do you think? Do you think it was propaganda, or do you think the Druids really did perform human sacrifices?
We cannot be sure. Yet the bogs of Ireland hold their own grim secrets. Bodies of kings slain by a threefold death: pierced, burned, drowned. Were they criminals, sacrifices, or rulers given to the gods? Their silence is unsettling. For the Druids, death was no end. They taught that the soul was immortal, passing from body to body in an endless cycle. A Celt could march into battle without fear, for death was only a doorway. But for the living, Samhain was a season of dread. The sun's light faltered, shadows lengthened, the green of summer withered to rot. It was the year itself dying, and the dead were thought to stir.
The image of the Druids has haunted the imagination for centuries. Half priest, half sorcerer, walking between worlds.
Here in Yorkshire, a monument was raised to them, the so-called Druids' Temple, not built by Celts, but by William Danby, a wealthy landowner in the 19th century. A folly, a fascination with mysteries of the past carved into stone. Yet even here, legends cling. They say a hermit was paid to live among its arches. Others whisper of rituals performed by torchlight. Walk its shadows today and you may feel it yourself, a silence that weighs heavy as though waiting for a chant to begin. It's no true temple, no, but it is an echo, a ghost of our hunger for the old gods, for firelit rites and forbidden wisdom. And standing here as autumn decays into winter, it feels like a fitting place to reflect on what Samhain meant. A season when life and death met in its shadow, and the veil between worlds grew thin. When Rome's iron legions pressed into Celtic lands in 43 AD, they found fires already burning for the dead. Samhain was centuries old, and the Romans, masters of conquest, did not quench it. They absorbed it, binding Celtic fear and flame to their own rituals. One of these was Feralia, a night when Romans whispered to the shades of their ancestors. Families crept to gravesides, laying bread, wine and salt on the earth, gifts for the hungry dead. Another was the festival of Pomana, goddess of fruit and orchards. Her emblem was the apple, and in the dark of autumn its skin was pierced in rites of divination. What we laugh at now as apple bobbing was once a game of prophecy, where fate itself might be glimpsed in the ripple of water and the bite of fruit.
So centuries passed and eventually Rome fell, and by the 9th century the church took over a lot of the Celtic lands. Now at which point they didn't obviously like the idea of Samhain, so they tried to douse it with holy water, but the old flames would not go out so easily, would they? And so the church decided to give them brand new Christian names.
November 1st, the Celtic New Year, was renamed All Saints' Day. The day after, All Souls' Day, was given to the dead. And the night before All Hallows' Eve crept on, a shadow that could not be shaken. Yet even under new robes, the old ways bled through. People baked soul cakes, sweet offerings for the wandering dead. In the black of night, cloaked figures went door to door begging for bread in exchange for prayers. Refuse them and risk unrest from the spirits themselves. Disguises were donned, not for fun but for survival, to confuse the spirits that prowled the lanes. Bonfires still roared against the night, their flames now mirrored in the carved faces of hallowed turnips. later pumpkins, grim, glowing ways to keep the dead at bay. And so it was that Samhain lived on.
So much seems changed, but has it really? I mean, if we look at the carved pumpkins, carved jack-o'-lanterns, charms against evil, and then you look at children dressing up and going door to door, trick-or-treating. Obviously, we know now that people will dress up and try and fool the spirits. So at a time when the veil becomes thinner, especially at Halloween, maybe something ancient still clings in the air, and maybe a lot of us do still genuinely fear those spirits coming back on Halloween night.
So Samhain became Halloween, and Halloween has become a global season. Once rooted in the Celtic fringes, it now flickers across the world. From Eastern Europe to Japan and China, lanterns burn, costumes appear, and rituals of the dead resurface in strange new forms.
Not everyone welcomes it. A lot of people think that Halloween is too dark, and now you know some of the stories and the myths behind it, you'll understand why. But what do you think? How do you celebrate Halloween? Do you go trick-or-treating? Do you maybe carve a pumpkin? Do you maybe horror binge some horror movies? Let me know in the comments. And do you secretly feel the tug of the old ways, believing that there's maybe a little bit more behind it than the mask and the sweets?
Some believe this season remains a doorway, that the veil between worlds really is thinner. And if that is true, then perhaps it is a time to take advantage of it, to light candles for your ancestors, to lay out offerings of food or drink and remember the ones who came before, to meditate, reflect, and ask for guidance as the year turns darker, to guard against what is less kind by protection rituals, by prayer, or by keeping the old bonfires burning in spirit, if not in flame. And yet, for all these practices, one truth remains. Halloween has always been a night of blurred boundaries, a night of games and feasting, yes, but also a night of fear, a night when the stories cease to be stories, when shadow figures are seen, when phantom footsteps are heard, when ghost tales take form. And that is where our journey leads us next. We have walked with demons, exorcisms, phantom funerals, omens, druids, and spirits. Now at last we come to the moment itself, when the veil opens and the spirits are said to appear.
Blimey, we have learnt some seriously cool stuff on this journey so far. So we are here now, nearly at the end, for Halloween itself, the main event. Along the way, we have learnt some incredible things. Well, I certainly have learnt some things along the way. So first off, we had the battle between good versus evil. We learnt how fear can make us do some very strange things, including mutilating our own neighbours. We looked into death omens and the precautions that regular people took to ensure that the spirits had a smooth transition into the afterlife. And then, of course, Halloween night itself, where there have been some very strange things going on, and it explains a lot of the practices that we make today. The next step on our journey is, of course, Halloween night itself, where we are going to put together everything we've learnt to find out what happens if all the messages are ignored, the rituals don't happen, and the spirits are indeed left to wander the night. Okay, so keep your bonfires burning, my friends. Stay safe. Stay curious, and until next time, don't have nightmares. There'll be no human sacrifices tonight though, or animal ones at that. I will see you on Halloween, my friends. I've been Claire, this has been The Wanderlust Way. Take care.